Hey guys, today's video is part of our intro series on how to load third-party impulse responses into your favorite amp modeler. I'm Alex with Quantum DSP, and in today's example, we're going to use the Quad Cortex to show you how it's done. Now, this is a really basic introduction, so if you're an advanced user, you probably know what's going on here. But feel free to hang out with us, grab your favorite guitar, it's time to rock. Alright, so I'm firing up Cortex Control. This is the desktop editor for the Quad Cortex, and most manufacturers like Line 6 and Kemper will have similar interfaces, but how you interact with the impulse response libraries will vary from device to device. Now here we are on the main signal chain screen. Now it's important to note that most manufacturers will require you to preload your hardware with the third-party impulse responses before you can begin working with them on the amplifier block. Now in some cases, it's a good idea to log into your account to make sure that your device is currently up to date, and so is your editing software. Now this also provides you with additional cloud functionality and storage. As a personal side note, it is a good idea to have everything on your hardware because you could be in a live situation where you don't have access to Wi-Fi and things can get a little dicey at that point. You'll notice that we have a head and a cabinet already loaded onto our signal chain and a blank space here which will become home to our IR loader, but we're going to return to that in a moment. You see at the top of the screen here we have a menu item called Grid and a second one for Directory. Let's click on the Directory icon. Alright, so we've arrived in the Directory menu. You'll notice several grayed out menu options on the left side of the screen. We want to click on the one at the bottom called Impulse Responses. And here we are in the Impulse Response library. As a pretty standard option here, you can click on this and you can go through all the files on your computer, or you can simply drag and drop this convenient file that we have here called Quantum Test IR and drop it right into your Impulse Response library. Now the file's been loaded up, we hit close, and let's scroll to the bottom of our library and you'll see Quantum Test IR, conveniently loaded on December 31st, 1969. So it's perfect for a classic rock revival. Alright, let's go back to the grid. Now, there's two methods you can use to implement your IRs once you've loaded it into your impulse response library. The first and preferred method is to use one of the onboard impulse response loaders, and the second being using the existing cabinet block. But for the moment, we're going to disable the cabinet block. Now let's return to this symbol here, the click plus, and let's scroll down to the left side of the screen until we see Impulse Response Loader. So let's click on the IR loader. So now you've opened up another menu with a list of options to choose from, and you'll see that the Cortex allows us to choose from dual or single impulse response loaders. The dual effectively functions as multiple microphones, or could honestly be construed as two cabinets, depending on how the IR is configured, whereas the single is a singular mic or a singular cabinet. Now these are both offered in mono, stereo, and light formats. You can use whichever format suits your particular application, and the light one is used for preserving CPU when you have a more complicated signal chain. But for today's example, we're going to focus on the dual stereo and the single stereo options. So let's click on the single stereo because this one is the most beginner friendly. So now you'll see at the bottom of the screen we have another drop down box where it says choose IR file. So let's click on that, and now you can see this is our impulse response library, so you're probably familiar with that. And we can scroll to the bottom and click on Quantum Test IR and select Done. So there you go, you're ready to rock. Now let's disable the impulse response loader. Okay, so we click on the plus sign, and of course we've got our menu item on the left here, and let's scroll down to IR loader. This is where we will select our dual stereo functionality, and you'll see here we have Impulse Response 1 where we can select an IR file, and on the right for Impulse Response 2 it's currently grayed out. So let's go ahead and choose IR file. So now here we are in the library which you've seen, and we're going to scroll to the bottom of that and hit Quantum Test IR and select Done. So that functions a lot like your single impulse response loader. It's fairly straightforward. But now you'll see that the Impulse Response 2 is lit up. So we can select another Impulse Response file here. Now this is not necessary. You can actually start making music with just the one Impulse Response. But for sake of argument, let's click on the Choose IR file and let's select Sandcastles. So now you have two IRs loaded, and we can get some pretty creative results from this. In this case, they are both multi-microphone impulse responses, so we're going to have a multitude of sounds here drawn together. Now, the reason that this is more of an advanced type setup is that there can be phase issues when you're blending certain IRs, and if you're not familiar with IRs, it can have some pretty interesting results. Now, sky's the limit. Feel free to experiment with this, but this is the end of the first method and preferred method of using the impulse response loader. Okay, so the second method for loading IRs is via the cabinet block, as we discussed earlier. So let's click on the cabinet block. When you're using multi-mic impulse response libraries like Quantum's hybrid IRs, you can get some very creative or interesting results when blending the two, much in the same way that we noticed with the dual impulse response loader. The one thing important to note is that you're not going to have an accurate representation of the speaker that's named here once you start importing IRs. So let's click on this thing on the left here that says Dynamic 57, and you'll notice that there are a bunch of built-in microphones that we can select. But for this example, let's click on Load Custom IR. And so this brings up our impulse response library, which we saw earlier. And let's scroll to the bottom and click Quantum Test IR and select Done. Now you're ready to basically rock, and this would give you the sound of the Quantum Test IR plus the Ribbon 160 listed on the side. Now, there are ways to turn this off if you like just the Quantum Test IR, or if we leave this on, we now have the Ribbon 160. But let's click on the Ribbon 160 once again. You'll notice that there's other microphones listed here, but we can select Load Custom IR, and let's try and blend it with Sandcastles and select Done. So that wraps up today's video on how to load third-party impulse responses into your favorite amp modeler. Now, if you have any questions or want to join the discussion, feel free to comment below. And as always, we'd appreciate a like or a subscribe if you enjoyed the content you saw today. Thanks for your time. Have a rocking day.